So, what are these rock stacks that you might see while hiking, and why are they problematic? So, if you're hiking basically anywhere, you have probably seen, well, yeah, rock stacks. They go by many different names. In the US, a lot of times we'll call them cairns. But I'm using the term rock stack because different countries and different cultures, which we'll touch on in a second, have very, very different names for basically a stacking of rock. Now, let's talk first about what they are used for. Traditionally, many rock stacks were actually used for trail markers. They would let someone know where to go, and they actually have very prehistoric origins. There are several rock stacks in protected areas that are thousands of years old, and those are absolutely important. They have extreme cultural importance, but also directional importance, right? We talked about how how it will lead you down a certain trail. However, I will venture to guess that the vast majority of rock stacks that you see are like these, where they are just a few rocks high, and they are in random places. Little stream beds, for example, on the side of a trail, not necessarily at a fork in a trail, not necessarily at a point where it may be difficult to actually find your way. So why do people do this then? Rock stacks are mainly done by people. It has definitely been a plague across Instagram, where people will do rock stacks and post them. And yes, I do think that in many cases, the ones that are posted do look cool. I will fully acknowledge that there is something to be said about the connection with nature, where you're just sitting there and trying to balance these nature-worn rocks. However, what isn't really shown properly is that rock stacks can actually have some pretty major ecological problems. So the thing with rock stacking is that in dry creek beds like the one I'm in right now, it may not necessarily be as big of a problem. Where it is a big problem is in wet streams, where you are actively taking rocks out of the river to stack them. And you'll see many videos of this. You'll see pictures everywhere. You'll see people doing this actively. These rocks are creating microhabitats. Microhabitats are these, they're habitats for microorganisms. They're habitats for small little critters. So your insects, as well as many bacteria. And even though this area may seem extraordinarily dry, it can actually house a lot of creatures. So what these rocks really do, and what they really excel at, is creating a moist area. So you see here how moist this ground is. I know if you don't like the word moist, you're gonna have to get used to it. But anyone who has looked for salamanders or snakes or frogs or creepy crawlies or anything knows the importance of flipping for moist habitat. Actually, yeah, here's a really great example. Flip this around. So underneath this here, we'll see little bitty critters swimming around, crawling around. Looks like a little caterpillar. Actually, on the base of the rock, we have more little focus worms. Is that a worm? Yeah, that's a worm. Other little creepy crawlies, like these little roly-polies. And this is critical habitat for them. Without it, they would likely desiccate. They would dry out. I'm going to put this back as gently as I can with one hand. Okay. So by rock stacking, what we're doing is we are effectively destroying that habitat. The area underneath dries out, and any organisms that were down there are gone. In river ecosystems, this is even more critical because these rocks often have many creatures underneath. So tadpoles, you'll find lots of larval insects, you'll find other aquatic insects, you'll find lots of egg masses that lay underneath and stay under the water underneath these rocks. So by removing these rocks, we are destroying that habitat. As well, with the river ecosystems, the algae that is growing on those rocks, they cannot survive. The algae, nor can the critters, survive when you move them out of water. So what we're saying is that even though we are dealing with small organisms, things that you really wouldn't think about, it is actively destroying habitat. Now that's an ecological impact, but I want to make a broader impact about what it kind of says. So one, whenever we are, say, doing it, and we're doing it in an area where there are actual cairns, ones that are used for direction. We are now making it harder for them to actually be reliable as means of trail markers. We are actively making it worse. We are really kind of taking this really cool and interesting thing and taking it away. And of course, like in areas like I'm at now, you won't see that. In areas where I'm sitting now, I think it's pretty dang obvious that the rock stack isn't for direction. However, what it does is it says something about our relationship with nature, right? So when we build a rock stack, I think one of the critical principles that we often we say but don't really think about too much is that concept of leave no trace. When I say leave no trace, what I'm meaning is that we should be minimizing our impact, and perhaps that is a much better statement, right? But you get it. You understand intuitively why this rock stacking isn't a great thing. We are actively putting our mark onto nature that we are already doing a pretty damn good job at making big marks on. So what it's really getting back to is showing this dominion over nature. We can control it. We can do whatever we want with it. And I have big problems with that. And you may think like, okay, what's my one little rock stack gonna harm? I'm just doing it for Instagram to, make something. Rock stacking is often a monkey see, monkey do thing. There is actually an area that I go to pretty often where every time me and my friends go, we spend the time to take down every single rock stack we see. And there are 2 or 3 main areas where there are a lot of rock stacks. Because one person does it and someone else says, oh, that's kind of cool, I want to let my kids do that. Then another person says, oh, I think that would look great on my Instagram feed, let me do that as well. And what you get is this chain reaction of rock stacking. And it may not even be that direct, where it's like in that exact same location. It can easily be, you see this last weekend, so now you are going to, again, do it next weekend somewhere else, or you see it and you're going to do it again. And as I'm talking about this, I find another one. Rock stacking has many issues, from ecological issues that can really harm things from microinvertebrates or just small critters in general, but it has larger, I don't even know what to call it, societal, philosophical, I guess, impacts as well. It shows something about how we view nature. And I think those 2 main reasons are really what encapsulates a lot of why some people have, myself included, extreme disdain for rock stacking. Now, here's maybe where I deviate a bit from the norm. I'm in a very dry creek bed, right? There is not water, and there are many, many rocks that I can grab that aren't wet underneath. They are loosely resting. Like, let me show you. So, for example, this rock right here, right? I lift it up, there is nothing underneath it. It is dry, it is resting on top of rocks. I don't necessarily, we're gonna get to that, I don't necessarily have an issue with going out with your family, going with friends, finding those rocks that are resting on top of things, that are not wet underneath, that do not have little critters that depend on those rocks. I don't necessarily, see that? I picked up a rock that was a little wet underneath and I put it right back. I don't have too much of a problem with finding those rocks and maybe stacking them, right? I will disagree in taking pictures, I will disagree in promoting it, but here's where I differ. I will put every single rock back right where I found it. And then if you watch my Instagram feed, you will know that whenever I see a rock stack in nature that is unattended, I aggressively knock it over. See, this one had dirt underneath it. It was, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It probably destroyed, look, you can see exactly where that rock was. Let me see if I can find maybe that was the rock. Let's put it back. Actually, right here too. So I knocked them over because of the issues I talked about. Perhaps me knocking it over won't help that ecological issue, but it's definitely going to help that societal one, that philosophical one. So I guess to close things off, we should probably actually knock over the rock stack that I started this video with. Don't stack rocks, kids.